Hi guys. Tonight we step into a world far colder than your cozy room though. Thankfully, only in imagination. The year is somewhere around the 13th century. The sun has long sunk behind frost-rimmed trees, and the air tastes of wood smoke and iron. You can almost see your breath rising, curling in thin silver ribbons as you trudge down a rutted track toward a cluster of low wooden huts. This isn't the medieval castle of legends, no grand halls, no roaring banquets, just the humbler world that kept the kingdom fed. Here, survival isn't heroic, it's habitual, and in winter you probably wouldn't survive this without friends, fire, and a remarkable tolerance for damp straw. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you want, drop your location and the local time in the comments. I love knowing where in the world my sleepy travelers are tuning in from. Now, dim the lights. You pull your cloak tighter as the path grows rough. The wind scratches against your hood, the kind of wind that gnaws rather than blows. Ahead, the huts are huddled like animals themselves, walls leaning in, thatched roofs crusted with snow. You can smell peat smoke mixed with something less pleasant. Manure, damp wood, and the sour tang of humanity. It's not romantic, not yet. But you're not here for comfort. You're here to understand how people once endured the kind of cold that could freeze a river solid for months. A dog barks as you near the first door, and through a crack in the wood, you catch a flicker of red firelight, faint but alive. The door creaks open, and you duck beneath the lintel. Inside, the warmth is immediate but uneven. Your face tingles as the cold lifts, yet your feet are still blocks of ice. The single room holds everything: life, sleep, birth, death. There's a smell of smoke that clings to everything: the walls, the hair, the straw. You can almost feel it coating your throat. A family moves around you, 3 generations at least, plus a pig nosing the straw floor. The roof beams loom low enough to bump your head. Soot stains the rafters like forgotten clouds. It's dark, except for the flicker from a small open hearth near the center. The fire doesn't blaze, it sighs. Every ember is precious. Firewood, after all, is harder to find than food. Peasants spend whole days collecting sticks from hedgerows, risking punishment for taking what belongs to the Lord's forest. You crouch closer, feeling the sting of Thor returning to your fingers. The children's cheeks are apple red from heat on one side and cold on the other. They giggle, wrapped in ragged layers that have seen too many winters. Their mother stirs a pot suspended above the coals, some thin pottage of barley, turnip, and maybe a shred of salted pork. Dinner will not be a feast, but it will fill their bellies enough to sleep. Here's your first small truth. Medieval peasants didn't sleep in beds the way you know them. Their beds were mounds of straw in wooden frames, or sometimes just heaps of hay on the floor. Blankets were rare, and pillows, if you could call them that, were sacks of grain or rolled-up clothes. Yet for all its roughness, this space is their sanctuary. The walls, made of timber and daubed with mud, creak in the wind like tired bones, but they keep the snow out mostly. A curious little historical fact: many huts didn't have chimneys. The smoke from the hearth drifted upward, curling between rafters and escaping through the thatch. It sounds miserable, but that smoke kept insects away, preserved meat hanging from hooks, and even sealed the wood against damp. The family breathes it in all night long, eyes watering, throats raw. Still, they know the difference between discomfort and danger. When the smoke thins, it means the fire's dying, and that's when frost creeps in like an unwelcome spirit. You shift to the corner, where bundles of herbs hang from a beam: sage, rosemary, maybe a little wormwood. Their scent is sharp and sweet, fighting back the musk of the pig. These herbs aren't just for cooking, they're charms against sickness, tokens of stubborn hope. Historians still argue whether peasants truly believed herbs had magical properties or simply knew their medicinal worth by intuition. Either way, they worked with what they had. Your eyes adjust to the gloom. You notice the uneven walls patched with whatever materials came to hand: animal dung, straw, even scraps of cloth. Each repair tells a story of survival. Outside, the wind whips across frozen fields. The sound it makes like a moan or a distant sea seeps through the cracks. You understand now why everyone crowds close together come nightfall. The hut isn't just a house. It's a womb against the world. In the corner, you spot a small wooden chest, rare, valuable. It holds the family's best possessions: a comb carved from bone, a wooden spoon polished by use, maybe a bit of cloth dyed in fading blue. Luxury here is not about gold. It's about having something not immediately essential to survival. And in the heart of this winter night, survival is the only constant thought. As the family finishes their meal, the room quiets. The children's laughter fades into whispers, then yawns. You hear the father murmur a short prayer, half gratitude, half plea. Outside, a rooster gives a confused cry into the dark. The mother adds another stick to the fire, watching the flame lick it greedily. You can see her lips move, counting maybe, or planning tomorrow's work, fetching water from the frozen stream, mending the thatch, milking the cow if it's still alive. Then, silence settles thick, heavy, comforting. You feel the first pull of drowsiness, that ancient instinct to rest when darkness presses close. The dog circles twice, then lies by the door, nose to the crack where the cold seeps in. His breath fogs faintly. The fire hisses. And you, yes, you begin to feel the weight of centuries slide across your eyelids. One quirky tidbit before you drift further. In some northern villages, people mixed soot and animal fat into a kind of crude insulation, smearing it along walls and under roofs to trap heat. It sounds grotesque, but it worked just barely. Imagine sleeping beneath layers of smoke-soaked straw, the air thick and bitter, yet knowing that beyond those walls, the world could kill you in minutes. As you lie there beside the imagined warmth, your heartbeat slows. You feel the rhythm of the medieval night, the quiet labor of keeping alive. No clocks, no alarms, no hum of electricity, just the breath of those around you and the distant groan of the frozen forest. Tomorrow will bring toil, yes. But for now, in this smoky, flickering hut, sleep comes like mercy. You can almost hear the soft chorus of snores, the pig's grunt, the wind's lullaby. Somewhere in that darkness, a spark of ember glows tiny, persistent, eternal. You close your eyes, the chill receding. This is where the story begins. The fire sighs lower as the night stretches onward. You feel the walls tighten around you not from fear but from familiarity. The wooden hut is alive in its own quiet way, expanding and contracting with the cold. You sit there, tracing the lines of the rough timber, each one hand-hewn by someone long gone, someone whose calluses were thicker than your winter gloves. The boards aren't uniform. Gaps shimmer faintly where wind threads through, whispering secrets of the frost outside. You can smell the wood's memory, sap long dried, smoke absorbed from hundreds of nights like this one. You shift your gaze across the small space. The hut is one room, but it contains a whole world. There's no dividing wall, no privacy, just zones, one for cooking, one for sleeping, one for storing what little grain hasn't yet been eaten by mice. In the far corner, the family's tools lean in an exhausted pile. A hoe, a wooden rake, a dull scythe. Every one of them will return to the field when the thaw comes. But for now, the tools rest too. Even iron needs sleep. You can almost taste the air, thick with soot, warm close to the fire and freezing a step away. The floor beneath you isn't flat but matted straw over packed earth. That's not laziness, it's practicality. Wooden floors are rare and expensive. Mud floors keep the heat in, even if they steal your socks' dignity. Every winter, families spread fresh straw, not for comfort, but to soak up moisture and filth. When it turns black, they sweep it out and lay another layer. The smell? Earthy, animal, real. A mainstream historical fact drifts to mind. Most peasant huts in medieval Europe had no windows, just a small hole covered with oiled cloth or a wooden shutter. Glass was a luxury far beyond reach. During the coldest months, that hole stayed shut, trapping smoke and heat in equal measure. You'd cough. Your eyes would sting, but the air inside was still warmer than the wind that could flay bare skin in minutes. People learned to live in twilight, seeing by the fire's pulse and the moon's grace. The family around you moves with slow, practiced coordination. The father sits sharpening a knife against a whetstone, the rhythm steady, almost meditative. The mother patches a garment, her needle glinting in the firelight. The children huddle near the pig, giggling at its grunts, pressing tiny hands against its coarse bristles. The animal doesn't seem to mind. Warmth is warmth, whatever shape it takes. There's a simple logic in the design of the hut. It isn't built for beauty but for endurance. The low ceiling traps heat. The thatch above, thick as an arm's length, keeps out snow. The walls, coated with a mix of mud, straw and dung, hold warmth better than bare wood ever could. It's the architecture of necessity. You can almost hear the reasoning echo across centuries. If it keeps the wind out, it's good enough. You walk your gaze along the walls again and spot something odd, a crude symbol carved into the timber near the door. It's a circle with a cross inside. The father catches your glance and shrugs, half smiling. Keeps the night spirits out, he might say if he could speak across time. That's the quirky tidbit of this scene. Peasants often scratched or burned protective marks known as witch marks into their homes to ward off evil or misfortune. Sometimes they were crosses, sometimes runes, sometimes just a pattern passed down without meaning. Historians still debate whether these symbols reflected deep belief or simple habit. After all, when every night feels haunted by the cold, you cling to any comfort you can carve. You notice a second hearthstone, blackened and cracked, shoved against the wall. Maybe it belonged to the grandparents before the roof collapsed years ago. In this age, people rebuilt rather than replaced. Wood was scavenged, nails straightened, rope reused until it turned to dust. The hut, in a sense, is a living palimpsest, layers of survival written one over another. From outside, a low howl cuts the silence. A wolf, perhaps, or a dog gone feral. The children freeze. The pig snorts and burrows deeper into straw. The father lifts his head, listening. But after a moment, the sound fades. The mother murmurs something, maybe a charm, maybe just comfort, and the rhythm of the night returns. You let your thoughts wander. How many winters has this family endured? 5? 10? The average peasant life is short, 30 or 40 years at best. Yet each generation leaves behind a hut, a few bones, a name in no record book, and still, they survive. You wonder, almost wistfully, how different they are from you. Both you and they crave warmth, safety, rest. The trappings change, but the longing never does. Your eyes follow a wisp of smoke curling through a crack in the roof. It glows faintly orange in the firelight before fading into darkness. That's the hut's exhale, the smoke rising like a prayer. There's something mesmerizing about its rhythm. Inhale, exhale, the steady breath of shelter itself. You realize that this single room, cramped and crude, holds everything a peasant could want in midwinter. A fire, a family, and a roof that doesn't leak too badly. But comfort is a relative term. You shift closer to the wall, and frost creeps under your cloak from where the mud meets the ground. It's astonishing how thin the line is between inside and outside. A misplaced step, a wider crack, and the cold wins. In some northern regions, families even built sleeping lofts, small platforms under the thatch to catch rising heat. It sounds clever, but imagine waking up with snowflakes drifting through the roof. You'd pull your straw blanket tighter, mutter a curse at the weather, and roll back into the warmth of bodies beside you. Historians still argue whether huts like these truly stayed warm through the night. Some claim the fire's embers and shared body heat were enough. Others suggest that peasants endured temperatures barely above freezing, wrapped in layers and prayers. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. Never cozy, never comfortable, but survivable. Humanity, after all, is good at adjusting to misery. You shift again, and a tiny sound catches your ear. the crackle of sap bursting in the fire. It's the hut's lullaby, the sound that tells you all is well. Outside, the frost thickens on the thatch, glittering faintly under the moon. The world beyond is silent, suspended. Inside, the family finishes their tasks, one by one slipping into their nests of straw. The mother lies down last, curling an arm around the smallest child. The fire shrinks to a smoulder, its glow licking the edges of the walls like a heartbeat. You realize you've been holding your breath, as though not to disturb them. There's a holiness in this simplicity, a reminder that even the poorest lives hold rhythm, care, and endurance. You breathe out slowly, letting the air fog before you. Your eyelids grow heavy. The smell of wood smoke, the faint rustle of straw, the muffled snore of the father, each sound folds into the next until they blur into something close to peace. You're part of the hut now, part of its heartbeat, its sigh, its warmth. The wind outside claws at the roof but can't get in, and for tonight, that's enough. The last embers glow like tired eyes as you stir from a half-dream, realizing you've been lulled by the steady rhythm of crackling wood. The air feels denser, now warm close to the hearth, but sharp and metallic by the door. You reach out a hand, feeling the faint tremor of heat on your palm, as if the fire itself breathes. In the hush of that small wooden hut, the hearth is the heart, beating slow and soft through the night. The hearth isn't just a practical invention, it's a shrine of survival. Generations have squatted beside it, rubbing hands raw over the same stones, whispering prayers to saints and spirits that the flame would last till morning. It's said in manorial records that a fire left to die could doom a family. You didn't simply light it again. Tinder and dry wood were too precious. You'd borrow flame from a neighbor, carrying it home in a smoldering bundle of moss. Imagine trudging through snow at midnight with that fragile light cupped in your hands. If it went out, your house froze. According to fragments of household accounts from the 13th century, some families even paid a fine to the lord for hearth rights, permission to collect firewood from his forest. The woods belonged to power. Warmth was a tax. Those who gathered sticks without leave might find themselves punished, sometimes with a beating, sometimes with a shilling gone. Yet necessity breeds creativity. Peasants scoured fields for dried cow dung or broken branches, bundling whatever would burn. It wasn't the scent of comfort, it was the scent of life. Your nose wrinkles at the smoke. It clings to everything, curling like a living thing, staining the rafters black and coating your hair until you smell permanently of campfire. Strangely enough, that scent became a badge of honesty, the smell of labor, not deceit. In the castle's courtly chambers, perfume reigned. Down here, smoke was the perfume of survival. One curious account from a Benedictine chronicle describes villagers tossing bits of salt into the fire to make it cheerful. The salt hissed and spat, sparks dancing like fleeting stars. The monks thought it sinful waste. The villagers thought it magic. Somewhere between the two, the truth smoulders. Even now, as you watch, the sparks seem to leap in rhythm with human hope, the tiniest rebellion against cold inevitability. You lean closer, tracing the shape of the hearthstone. It's cracked, patched with clay, and surrounded by the tools of daily firekeeping. A crooked iron hook, a blackened pot, a ladle whittled from wood. There's something humble and holy about it. The hearth was the axis of the hut where meals cooked, hands warmed, and stories spun. Every gesture circles back to this red core. In a world that offered few certainties, the fire was promise incarnate. We live another night. Some medieval writings hint that families would bank the fire before bed, covering embers with ash so it smouldered until dawn. In the morning, they'd stir it gently, coaxing life from what looked like death. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the faint sigh as the ash shifts a memory of yesterday's heat. A small boy, barefoot despite the chill, drags a charred log closer. His mother scolds softly but doesn't stop him. The child knows what to do. Even at 5 or 6, he's learned the ritual of warmth. He blows, cheeks puffed, until a tiny flame flickers. The family murmurs approval, the room momentarily brighter. You realize, warmth is not just fire, it's participation. Every breath helps. Modern historians remain divided about whether medieval peasants truly understood how to ventilate these huts. Some argue the smoke was tolerated, even welcomed, for its insect-repelling gifts. Others suggest that clever design, small roof holes, angled beams, let just enough air flow to keep the family alive without losing heat. Whichever side you believe, the result is the same, a delicate balance between suffocation and freezing. The medieval world lived on that knife edge. Your eyes wander to the soot-stained ceiling. The beams glimmer faintly, as though dust has become starlight. The smoke curls upward, tracing invisible stories on the wood. In a way, those stains are history itself. Years of breath, cooking, warmth, and despair fossilized above your head. If you could read them, they'd tell of births, deaths, and winters harder than this one. It's a little-known fact that many households carried embers from one home to another during festivals like Candlemas. The act symbolized continuity, the unbroken chain of flame through the seasons. To let your hearth go cold was to invite misfortune. To keep it burning meant luck, fertility, protection. Maybe it wasn't just superstition. Maybe it was memory, disguised as ritual. You move back from the glow, eyes half closed. Your skin prickles with the mix of heat and chill. The fire snaps suddenly, throwing sparks that dance across the mud floor. For an instant, the whole hut flashes into color. The copper of the mother's hair, the dull red of the father's tunic, the faint blue thread mended into a blanket. Then the light sinks again, settling into that familiar half-dark where time slows. Beyond the door, the wind hums a long, mournful note. Inside, the fire answers with a sigh. You realize that this conversation, the hush, the crackle, the slow breath of flame has been going on for centuries. You're merely eavesdropping. There's comfort in the repetition, the predictability of warmth. You sense that in a world where so little could be controlled, harvests, disease, lords, taxes, the hearth offered a tiny sphere of power. You could tend it, shape it, guard it, lose everything else, but if the fire still burned, the story continued. A final spark leaps, hisses, and dies. The smell lingers, soft and sweet now, like the end of a candle. You stretch your legs, the straw rustling beneath you, and feel that slow, heavy pull of drowsiness once more. The hut breathes with you, its rhythm syncing with your own. Outside, frost grips the world, unrelenting. Inside, you glow. And as you drift toward sleep, you realize something profound. In every age, warmth is not a luxury, it's a kind of faith. The night deepens, and the world beyond the hut hardens into silence. You stir slightly, your cheek pressed against something rough and faintly warm. Straw broken, uneven, alive with the scent of earth and hay. Beneath it, you can feel the hardness of the floor, packed soil molded by countless bodies turning through countless nights. This, you realize, is the medieval bed. No velvet, no feather, no fluff, only what the land provides. You shift, listening to the faint crunch beneath you. The straw rustles like whispering voices, and your fingers find a coarse thread of cloth, a sheet of sorts. Though calling it that feels generous. It's burlap or homespun linen, rough enough to scrub skin raw. Still, it keeps the chaff from sticking. These are the layers between a human body and the earth itself, a thin treaty against the cold. From surviving wills and household inventories, we know that straw mattresses called ticks were common among peasants. Each season, families stuffed them anew with hay, rushes, or dry leaves. When spring came, they burned the old filling to chase away fleas. You imagine the brief relief of that ritual, the scent of smoke cleansing more than just the air. A curious note from a 15th century French manor record mentions that villagers occasionally mixed dried mint or lavender into their bedding, not for luxury, simply to mask the smell. Those herbs, brittle and fragrant, gave the illusion of cleanliness in a world where washing linen in winter was near impossible. You picture it, the faint ghost of summer hidden under every sleeper's head. Your body grows heavy, yet your mind stays alert. You trace how each layer of cloth and straw acts as armor against frost. Above you, a blanket more a patchwork of rags than anything resembling comfort rests over your shoulders. Wool, coarse and uneven, pricks your skin. The warmth it offers is uneven too, hot at your chest, cold at your feet. But warmth isn't measured here in degrees, it's measured in how much of you stops shivering. Archaeological digs have unearthed fragments of such woolen textiles, stiff with lanolin and soot. They tell of spinning wheels humming in smoky corners, women twisting thread from sheep's fleece, men trading surplus wool for salt or ale. Every fiber you feel beneath your hand carries the story of labor and survival. There's a surprising trick to peasant comfort proximity. The family doesn't sleep apart, but pressed together, a jumble of limbs and breathing. The warmth of another body is as essential as the blanket. You might think it claustrophobic, but here, intimacy is insulation. The pig at the foot of the straw pile adds its own steady heat, snorting softly, unaware that it's as vital as the hearth itself. Some folklore suggests that villagers believed animals shared not just warmth, but protective energy during the night. A cow's steady breathing could ward off evil. A dog's body heat signaled luck. Whether you believe in superstition or thermodynamics, the effect is the same. No one sleeps alone if they can help it. Not every sound is peaceful, though. The night is filled with small irritations. The squeak of a mouse behind the chest, the twitch of straw against bare feet, the damp sigh of the thatch dripping slightly from melted frost. You turn, searching for a comfortable spot, and realize there is no such thing, only positions of slightly less discomfort. And yet, sleep finds you anyway. One parchment from an abbey ledger records that peasants occasionally placed a plank of wood or an upturned crate at the head of the straw bed as a pillow. Hard, yes, but it lifted the head above the floor's draught and, perhaps, deterred crawling pests. You test it in your imagination and smile wryly. Comfort, here, is a luxury of comparison. Scholars who study medieval domestic life remain unsure whether straw bedding was replaced regularly or simply added to. Some argue that families layered new straw over old until the floor itself rose by inches. Others believe the constant smoke kept vermin from overrunning it entirely. Either way, the result is the same: a bed that remembers everyone who's ever slept upon it. You glance around the dim interior, the shapes of sleeping figures barely outlined by the last glow of embers. A child murmurs something in a dream. The mother shushes him, half asleep herself. The rhythm of their breaths overlaps, forming a slow harmony. The scent of wool, smoke, and humanity thickens, not unpleasant, simply dense, like life itself. Outside, frost creeps higher on the walls. Inside, your body adjusts. The straw crackles when you shift your weight, but the sound is oddly soothing, like the murmur of leaves in summer. You feel yourself sinking, not into softness, but into surrender. And then you notice the faintest thing: a beam of moonlight cutting through a chink in the wall, silvering the straw at your feet. It's cold light, indifferent, yet it touches you gently, a reminder that the world beyond this hut still exists. Somewhere out there, snow stretches across fields, the village sleeps, and wolves pace at the edge of the wood. But in here, wrapped in rough cloth and shared warmth, you're untouchable. It's humbling, really. The comforts you take for granted, mattress, pillow, clean sheets, are absent, yet you find yourself drifting toward rest anyway. You realize that comfort is partly perception, partly gratitude. The peasants of these wooden huts might have called it blessed simply to wake up alive. The pig snorts once more, rolling in its straw. A log in the hearth collapses with a sigh. You feel the air shift, cool against your cheek, then settle again. For a moment, the entire hut feels like one living creature breathing, creaking, dreaming. You close your eyes, letting that sense of quiet endurance pull you deeper into the night. Morning never truly arrives in winter, it simply fades out of darkness into a weaker shade of grey. You wake to the soft sounds of a world stirring from shared exhaustion. The straw beneath you crackles faintly as someone shifts, and a child coughs from the corner, a dry little bark swallowed by sleep. The air is damp now, touched with the smell of ashes and the faint, sour tang of boiled grain left in the pot overnight. Before the day begins, there is the ritual, the nightly routine reversed in slow motion. The mother stirs first, always the mother. She pushes back the rags and rises from the nest, her breath visible in the gloom. She checks the fire still faintly alive beneath the ash and pokes it with an iron stick. A red glow answers her, fragile but obedient. With a practiced hand, she feeds it a curl of straw and a splinter of wood. Flames lick upward, as though waking too. You sit up slowly, feeling the stiffness in your limbs. The floor is colder now, the heat from the night spent, and the hut itself seems to groan in protest. A rooster outside announces nothing new, just another day that feels the same as the one before. You draw your cloak tight, shoulders hunched, and watch as the room reshapes itself around the living. According to estate records from the late 14th century, peasants' daily life began and ended with the care of their fire and animals. Before sleep, they brought livestock indoors, chickens in woven cages, goats tied to posts, sometimes even the family cow, heavy-eyed and steaming from the cold. The logic was simple. A beast's warmth was worth more than space. You glance toward the far end of the hut and see it, the cow, chewing lazily, the faintest plume of vapor curling from its nostrils. Its body heat radiates into the room, invisible yet essential. In a half-forgotten folk saying recorded by a village priest, people claimed that the cow's breath blesses the dreamer. Whether superstition or gratitude, it captures the truth. Animals and humans were partners against winter. No hierarchy, just mutual need. The family moves as a unit, each performing a silent, inherited task. The father crouches by the door, pressing a rag into the cracks where the wind sneaks in. The children gather kindling from a pile near the wall, sticks so small and damp that the fire hisses when they touch it. The mother ladles out what's left of last night's meal, adding a splash of water to stretch it further. This isn't breakfast, it's endurance in a bowl. One curious detail appears in a few medieval household guides. Families were advised to close their hut's single door at sundown, not only for warmth but for spiritual safety. Night was believed to be when spirits wandered, restless souls, fairies or thieves. Some nailed sprigs of holly or rowan above the lintel for protection. Whether out of faith or habit, the ritual persisted through centuries. You can almost hear the scrape of the wooden bolt sliding shut each night, a small sound of security in a dangerous world. Today, as they prepare for sleep once more, the same steps unfold in reverse. The chores of the day are done, the sky already bruising towards twilight, and the cold thickens again. The family gathers near the hearth, conversation soft, movement slower. The father sprinkles a few drops of ale on the floor, a gesture both practical and sacred, keeping dust down, offering thanks to whatever power still listens. From the hut next door comes a low laugh, carried faintly through the walls. Community doesn't sleep far away. Even privacy here has texture. You can feel your neighbor's presence like warmth radiating through the air. It's oddly comforting, knowing that others breathe, struggle, and rest beside you, each hut a heartbeat in the same frozen organism of the village. It's believed, from fragments of parish records, that peasants often shared lullabies while preparing for bed, half prayer, half song. The words varied from region to region, but the tone was universal, steady, repetitive, designed to quiet the mind. You imagine the mother humming now, voice low and rough from smoke, carrying an ancient melody that smooths the day's edges. The children's eyes droop, their bodies leaning unconsciously toward her warmth. There's something ceremonial about how they prepare to rest. The door is checked again. The embers are covered with ash, preserving them till morning. The family crosses themselves, murmuring words that blend Latin and local dialect, a spell against hunger, against night. Sleep isn't leisure, it's an act of faith. Researchers studying medieval daily rhythms often note how the darkness defined existence. In summer, people might work till the stars appeared. But in winter, nights stretched unbearably long, forcing families to adjust their bodies to its rule. Sleep came early, broke in the middle for quiet conversation, then returned before dawn. You'll feel that rhythm later, the pause between first and second sleep, a strange intermission of thought in the deep night. The hut, now sealed, becomes a cocoon. You can hear the faint settling of wood, the sigh of the wind finding no entry. The fire's glow flickers over faces, softening them into something timeless. The father mutters a last word about tomorrow's chores, but it fades into drowsiness. The mother tucks a scrap of cloth around the youngest's shoulders, then lies down herself. In that silence you understand the rhythm of a peasant night. Not stillness, but surrender. Everything is pared down to the essentials: heat, breath, hope. You feel your own breathing slow to match theirs. Outside, frost scrawls delicate patterns across the doorframe. Inside, human warmth draws invisible lines of defiance. A faint squeak, a mouse, perhaps scurries somewhere unseen. The pig grunts softly. Someone sighs in sleep. All of it becomes part of the same music, one that never truly stops, just ebbs and flows like a tide. You close your eyes again, letting the fire's glow paint your eyelids red. You think of all the nights like this across centuries, the same huts, the same rituals, the same fragile warmth. What holds them together isn't just habit, but tenderness disguised as necessity. The mother's voice, barely audible, hums a final note. The child's breathing evens. The wind retreats. You can almost believe the hut itself sleeps too, dreaming of spring. Night has deepened to its quietest hour. You lie awake, your breath mingling with the faint rhythm of others sleeping around you. The air is thick, carrying the scent of straw, smoke, and animal musk. A single ember glows in the hearth, pulsing faintly, as if the hut itself still breathes. You listen, and the soundscape of a medieval night slowly unfolds. At first it seems like silence, but it isn't. The hut murmurs in its sleep. You hear the wood creak, a slow settling of beams adjusting to the cold. A soft thud marks the fall of snow sliding off the roof. Somewhere beneath the straw a mouse rustles, its tiny paws like whispers. Beyond the door, the wind sighs, threading through every crack, each gust a reminder that winter never truly leaves. If you listen harder, the village itself begins to speak. Distant dogs bark at shadows. A rooster, confused by moonlight, crows too early. In another hut, someone coughs. The sound travels through still air, as if the night has stretched itself thin to carry it. The village feels alive, though every soul is half dreaming. Records from manorial courts mention that noise after dark could be cause for suspicion. The quiet of a winter night was sacred, and loud disturbances might lead to gossip or even accusation. People valued peace because it was fragile, and because the dark held enough mystery without human interference. One curious finding from rural chronicles describes how sound travelled differently in frozen air. Voices carried farther, footsteps echoed against frost-hardened soil, and even a single door closing could seem like a hammer strike. In such stillness, privacy was impossible. Every secret was public, every movement known. Yet somehow, that closeness bred trust as much as tension. Your ears follow the cadence of the hut again. The pig snorts and shifts, releasing a puff of warm breath that smells faintly of hay. A child murmurs in his sleep, a dream slipping out in a half-word. The mother turns, her linen rustling softly. All these noises blend into a kind of music, the lullaby of survival. If you grew up with it, it would be comforting. The human mind can learn to love any rhythm that repeats often enough. Contemporary scholars examining rural acoustics believe that these environments shaped how people thought about silence. Modern quiet is absence. Medieval quiet was texture. It had sound within it, the fire, the wind, the breath of livestock. To the medieval ear, complete stillness would have felt wrong, even frightening, as though the world had stopped turning. You open your eyes again, watching the faint shimmer of light from the hearth. The smoke drifts upward, tracing a slow, sinuous line that fades into the darkness above. It carries the scent of burning oak and peat, the kind of smell that stays in your hair for days. You think about how, centuries later, when archaeologists uncover remnants of soot on old rafters, they find stories encoded there, the rhythm of daily fires, the chemistry of survival. A curious note from an abbey letter recounts a monk's winter visit to a village, describing the unending music of peasant huts. He wrote that the sounds reminded him of the sea, each murmur another wave breaking in miniature. Perhaps he was right. Lying here, you can almost believe you're afloat in some quiet ocean of warmth, carried along by the breath of others. Occasionally, the wind pushes harder, rattling the door latch. The father shifts, half waking, reaching for a stick by the fire, but then the gust fades. You feel the small tension pass through the room, a collective holding of breath. In the countryside, the night was both ally and adversary. It brought rest, but it also brought fear of thieves, wolves, or unseen spirits wandering the paths. Villagers often whispered charms before sleep, short phrases meant to keep harm outside the walls. It's said in certain local traditions that the first sound heard upon waking, be it a bird, a bell, or the sigh of wind, foretold the tone of the day. The medieval world was woven from such quiet omens. Every noise meant something. Every silence did too. You close your eyes once more and listen differently, letting sound become sensation. The walls hum faintly, a low resonance of timbers shifting under frost. The crackle of a settling ember fills the silence with comfort. The rhythm of breathing around you becomes a tide, steady, reassuring. This is the texture of the medieval night. No hum of machines, no distant engines, no clock ticking, only the heartbeat of wood and life. Outside, the sky is a dark velvet dome dusted with stars. The moonlight touches the snow and turns it into a frozen mirror. Occasionally, a gust stirs the trees beyond the village, and their branches scrape against one another, a dry sound like bones or whispers. Even that, somehow, belongs here. You imagine the villagers growing used to it all, their dreams shaped by these sounds. Some might dream of warmth, some of summer fields, others of bread and sunlight. In such nights, imagination becomes a form of comfort. The brain, half aware, fills the darkness with stories to keep itself company. Researchers of medieval dream culture point out that people often connected night sounds with divine messages or warnings. A knock might be a spirit, a whisper could be a saint. Even the cry of an owl was heavy with meaning. The world felt porous, and the line between waking and sleeping blurred with every creak of timber. The fire flares suddenly, a spark catching in the ash. You watch it rise, small but defiant, and for a moment the hut glows amber again. Faces appear in that light, the father's furrowed brow, the mother's calm profile, the children curled together like kittens. The pig twitches an ear. Then the light sinks once more, and darkness settles like a blanket. You let yourself drift with it, lulled by the symphony of quiet. Each sound folds into the next, until there is no difference between the room and the dream. Outside, the snow falls silently. Inside, the hut keeps its steady hum. And you, lying there, begin to understand that this is not mere silence at all. It is life, whispering softly through wood and winter. The darkness has a texture now, soft and steady, like velvet pressed against your eyelids. You are half asleep, hovering in that curious space between dream and waking. The fire still breathes faintly, a small orange glow beneath its blanket of ash. Around you, the family lies quiet, lost in their private worlds of sleep. The wind outside moans low through the frozen fields, and for a moment you could believe the entire world is dreaming with you. Dreams in the medieval night were not private matters. They were messages, warnings, or sometimes punishments. People spoke of them in the morning as if they had been shared visions, pieces of another realm slipping into this one. The line between sleep and faith blurred easily. You can almost hear the murmurs that might have followed breakfast. A neighbour saw the Virgin in her sleep. Another dreamt of wolves circling the churchyard. Someone else woke certain that a distant cousin had died. According to preserved sermon notes from the 12th century, priests often warned against trusting dreams too much. They might be divine, but they might also be demonic, tricks of hunger or cold. Imagine the confusion of a peasant whose dream felt more real than the waking world. Was it prophecy or folly? The church said one thing, the hearth another. In the close air of this hut, dreams carry the scent of smoke and straw. You close your eyes, and the shapes behind your eyelids flicker like the embers in the hearth. You see images that are not yours. A frozen river, a loaf of bread that never ends, a summer field where wheat bends without breaking. Perhaps they belong to the people beside you, fragments of their longing passing through the thin fabric of sleep. A curious note from a collection of English folk tales tells of a woman who claimed her dreams changed with the direction she slept. Facing east brought holy visions, facing west brought nightmares. The logic is poetic rather than scientific, but you can imagine her adjusting her position every night, seeking comfort in geography more than reason. You turn slightly on the straw, the sound muffled but distinct. The air tastes different now, warmer near the ground, colder near the roof. The fire's faint smoke moves slowly, curling through the dark. Somewhere in the corner, the cow exhales a heavy sigh. The smell of hay mixes with the lingering scent of boiled grain, and together they form an oddly soothing perfume of survival. Medieval people often believed that dreams were influenced by what you ate before bed. Heavy food led to troubled sleep. Pious meals brought peace. In one monk's chronicle, he blames his nightmare of serpents coiling in the rafters on a supper of onions and cheese. You smile at the thought, though your stomach tightens in sympathy. Hunger and fear share a border, and both live inside the same hut tonight. Your mind drifts back toward the images that float beneath consciousness. You feel a soft pull, as though the dark itself is trying to speak. Perhaps this is what medieval peasants felt every night. Not loneliness, but connection. A thin thread tying the living to something vast and unseen. The dream is a conversation, not an escape. Researchers who study sleep patterns in pre-industrial societies suggest that the stillness of such nights deepened the quality of dreaming. Without artificial light, without interruption, the human brain wandered further, inventing landscapes rich with sound and sensation. In a way, each dream became a private journey through a world shaped by firelight and frost. The child beside you shifts suddenly, murmuring something you cannot catch. His hand twitches, brushing against the straw. His mother, half asleep, places her palm gently over his and whispers a few words that sound like a prayer, then quiet again. You can feel the tenderness in that gesture, something ancient and ordinary. A faint draught slides across your cheek. You imagine it as the breath of the night itself, curious to see what these fragile creatures are dreaming about. Outside, the snow thickens. The stars are hidden. The village is sealed in silence, yet inside every hut minds are alive, weaving visions from hunger and hope. There is one recorded debate among early scholars about whether dreams came from within or without. Some said they rose from the humours of the body, bubbling from the stomach or the blood. Others insisted they descended from God, messages written in light. Both ideas sound poetic now, yet both capture something true. The body and the divine meet in the same place, the moment before waking. You feel your own thoughts fading into that deep place where imagination replaces awareness. The boundaries of the hut dissolve, and you drift through the same world these peasants might have known in their sleep. You walk through snowfields that glow blue under the moon. You hear distant bells ringing, though no church stands nearby. In the distance, a river glitters like glass, and somewhere, a fire still burns. When you open your eyes again, nothing has changed, yet everything feels softer. The air is thicker, the darkness warmer. Around you, the sleepers breathe in perfect rhythm. The dreams have done their work. The night, though still cold, feels gentler, as if it too has exhaled. You stretch your legs, careful not to disturb anyone. The straw whispers in reply. Your body aches, but there is comfort in it, the kind born from shared experience. You lie back, the faint warmth of the hearth touching your face, and let your mind wander once more. Sleep in the medieval hut is not just rest, it is communion. Every sigh, every murmur, every flicker of flame is part of a larger pulse that connects human beings across centuries. You listen to it now, the hum beneath history, and you begin to drift again. The night lingers, heavy and slow, until you forget where it began. The fire has almost died, leaving a faint orange blush across the walls. The air is cool again, but not unbearable. Around you the family lies close, their forms tangled in sleep. A soft snore rises and falls like waves, while the cow shifts her weight and lets out a long, contented breath. The rhythm of shared slumber is hypnotic, the sound of exhaustion turned to peace. You lie still and notice how the family shares their bed. There is no clear line dividing one sleeper from another, only a cluster of warmth bound by necessity. The father and mother sleep nearest the fire. The children press between them, small bodies curled like commas in a sentence that never ends. At the far edge, the grandmother lies wrapped in a thin blanket, her breathing steady, her presence a quiet anchor. Contemporary accounts from manor rolls and household records suggest that many rural families slept this way, all in one bed, or at least on one shared pile of straw. Beds, when they existed, were not private objects but communal ones. The idea of sleeping alone would have seemed not luxurious but absurd. To share warmth was to share life itself. In one traveller's journal from the late 14th century, a visiting friar described arriving at a peasant cottage and being offered a place in the family bed. He wrote that it was both an act of hospitality and survival. The hut was too small for modesty. Everyone simply turned toward the fire, closed their eyes, and trusted in sleep. You can feel that trust now, the intimacy of proximity that modern times have forgotten. Skin touches skin. The faint smell of sweat, smoke, and wool merges into something human and comforting. If someone stirs, the movement ripples through the group like a shared heartbeat. A curious observation recorded by folklorists centuries later noted that families often developed their own silent routines for sleeping together. Each person had a place, an angle, a way to tuck limbs so that no one froze. Even the smallest child learned instinctively how to fit within the family's pattern. It was choreography born from repetition, passed down without a word. As you lie there, you realize how profoundly this arrangement shaped their lives. Secrets were rare. Privacy existed only in thought, not in space. Every sound, every sigh, every restless turn was witnessed. Perhaps that made the bonds tighter, or perhaps it made silence more precious. Archaeological evidence from preserved peasant dwellings shows the remains of large wooden frames filled with straw, sometimes wide enough to hold 5 or 6 people. These were not beds in the modern sense, but platforms of sleep, built for endurance. You can picture one now. Rough-hewn planks creaking softly under the weight of a family that knows each other's warmth better than their own reflection. The grandmother stirs and mutters something that sounds like a prayer. Her hand moves to touch the child beside her, and he sighs softly, drifting deeper into his dream. You notice how the entire group unconsciously adjusts to make room. It is like watching a flock of birds shift formation mid-flight, graceful and wordless. There are written fragments from a court record describing disputes about shared bedding when strangers visited. A merchant passing through might rent half a straw mattress for the night, sharing space with a local family. It was considered normal, even virtuous, to offer warmth to travelers. The phrase, "share the bed and bread," was used to describe charity itself. You wonder what stories and conversations unfolded in such close quarters, how laughter or grief might ripple through the dark like sparks from a fire. Scholars still debate whether this practice fostered greater unity or quietly bred resentment. Some point to the strength of community ties in rural villages, others to the whispered rivalries that lingered between neighbors forced to share space. Whatever the truth, this intimacy shaped both comfort and conflict, stitching lives together in ways that can hardly be imagined now. You shift slightly, feeling the straw tickle your skin. The warmth of nearby bodies seeps through the rough layers of fabric, spreading slowly until your toes no longer ache. For the first time, the cold feels distant, like a memory fading into mist. It is impossible not to feel grateful for the closeness, even as you long for a breath of cool air. Outside, the wind picks up again, tapping at the wooden planks like a beggar seeking entry. The pig snorts softly, unimpressed. No one moves. Inside, the rhythm of breathing continues, layered and steady. The hut itself seems to hum with it. You feel your mind drift between waking and sleep once more, caught in the shared warmth that has sustained generations. It is a little-known fact that the phrase "to hit the hay" may trace faintly back to this world. Peasants quite literally struck or fluffed the straw before lying down, shaking out the damp and chasing away vermin. The sound of its soft thuds and rustles was the medieval equivalent of a bedtime routine. You can almost hear it now, gentle percussion against the floor, as families prepared for another night of endurance. You open your eyes briefly and find the room painted in pale silver from the moonlight that sneaks through a gap in the thatch. Faces glow faintly, serene and unguarded. The grandmother's hand rests over the child's arm. The father's brow is furrowed, even in sleep, perhaps dreaming of tomorrow's labor. The mother's lips move slightly, whispering something only her dreams can hear. You exhale, long and slow, and the straw shifts beneath you. Every sound is amplified by closeness. Every breath carries its own rhythm, its own fragile life. This is not luxury, not comfort as you know it, but there is an undeniable peace in it. You realize now that to sleep in such a place is to surrender to connection, to trust that warmth shared is warmth multiplied. The night stretches onward, timeless, the hut small but infinite in its purpose. As you close your eyes again, you no longer feel like an observer. You are one of them, sleeping shoulder to shoulder in the dark, held together by breath, by heat, by hope. When you wake again, the air tastes faintly of ashes and wool. The fire has sunk into a bed of quiet embers, glowing just enough to paint the walls with a dull red shimmer. The hut is still, though outside you can hear the slow groan of wind scraping across the frozen fields. Your breath fogs as you exhale, but the chill does not bite quite as hard. The warmth of the night still lingers in the straw, in the soft murmur of sleeping bodies. You shift slightly and pull the rough blanket closer to your chin. The fabric is thick but coarse, spun from wool that has never known gentleness. It scratches, it smells faintly of lanolin, but it holds the heat like a promise. The peasant world depends on such small miracles. A blanket is not decoration, it is armor. From what we know, through textile fragments preserved in peat bogs and archaeological layers, medieval wool was heavy and oily. The natural grease of the sheep helped it resist water, and though it might itch against bare skin, it trapped warmth even when damp. This, you realize, is the reason why peasants survived winters that would have frozen a careless traveler in a single night. The mother rises quietly, her feet whispering through the straw. She checks the edges of the door, running a hand over the gaps she stuffed with cloth the night before. Then she kneels by the hearth, cupping a handful of ash and blowing gently until a tiny spark blooms. A glow catches, faint but steady. She feeds it a scrap of kindling and waits, patient as stone, until the first blue flames appear. Some written household accounts from northern villages note that every family guarded their fire as fiercely as their food. A cold hearth was a shameful sight, a mark of neglect. To let your fire die was to invite gossip, and perhaps even suspicion. Fire meant diligence, care, and continuity. A family's hearth, like its name, had to be kept alive. The mother reaches for a pot of water, the surface rimed with a thin film of ice. She sets it near the flames, watching the frost melt into droplets. The smell of damp wool fills the air as the warmth returns. She adds a pinch of salt and a handful of grain from a small cloth bag, stirring slowly. It is not a feast, only a thin porridge, but in this frozen world it is salvation in a bowl. Near her the father stirs, rubbing his eyes. His first gesture is not to eat, but to thank the fire. You can almost hear the small words leave his lips, half prayer, half habit. Gratitude is not ceremony here. It is survival. The children wake next, stretching and yawning. The youngest wraps himself tighter in the blanket before the mother tugs it gently away. Textiles in this time were precious beyond measure. Spinning, weaving, and dyeing were tasks that consumed countless hours of labor. It is easy to forget that every thread in this room represents a life's work. Flax spun by hand, wool combed and twisted, linen beaten smooth on a river stone. Even the roughest peasant owned fewer garments in a lifetime than you might own in a year. To sleep under woven fabric was to rest beneath the weight of effort itself. In some village, customs recorded centuries later, people blessed their blankets at midwinter, sprinkling them with holy water or crossing them with a sprig of rosemary. They believed it kept illness away, though the scent of herbs probably did more to disguise the smell of smoke than to banish spirits. Yet it shows how deeply intertwined warmth and faith were, each reinforcing the other. The grandmother shifts, her frail voice cracking softly as she murmurs a line from a hymn. The sound is quiet but firm, a rhythm learned long ago. She runs her fingers over the blanket that covers her, touching each patched seam as if counting blessings. Her hands, worn and cracked, are the same color as the wool. Researchers of medieval domestic life sometimes debate how peasants repaired their bedding, since fabric was expensive and rarely discarded. Some argue that patches were layered until the original cloth disappeared beneath the repairs. Others think blankets were shared among families, passed down through generations until they became relics of warmth. Either way, these rough coverings outlasted the people who made them. You lie back again, letting the sounds of morning fill the small space. The water in the pot begins to bubble. The fire pops softly, releasing the scent of damp wood. The pig snorts awake, shaking straw from its back. The children whisper to one another, voices still heavy with sleep. Outside, a distant church bell tolls through the cold, slow and deliberate. The mother ladles the thin porridge into small wooden bowls. The family eats together, sitting on the floor, shoulders touching. There are no spoons for everyone, so they take turns, dipping and passing. The warmth of the food moves through them like sunlight. You can see their faces brighten, the color returning to cheeks that have spent too many hours in the dark. It is striking how such simplicity can hold so much meaning. A bowl of hot grain, a coarse blanket, a faint fire. Together they make the difference between despair and another day alive. You find yourself strangely humbled, wondering how often you have mistaken comfort for necessity. The mother wipes the bowls clean with a piece of bread, saving every crumb. She looks toward the door where daylight seeps through in pale threads. Then she turns back to the fire, her eyes reflecting the glow. For her, this is not luxury but triumph. The family is warm. The night has passed. The cold outside has not won. You lie still, absorbing the warmth, the rhythm of their morning, the way life continues despite everything. You realize that this rough blanket, heavy with smoke and history, is more than just a piece of fabric. It is an emblem of perseverance, of faith stitched into fiber. The world outside may be ice and hunger, but under this blanket, there is life. By the time the weak daylight filters through the cracks in the wall, the frost has already begun to thaw inside the hut. Drops of water slide down the beams, slow and uncertain, landing with quiet taps onto the earth floor. The family moves about carefully, conserving energy. They know that even in daylight, The cold remains, waiting for its next chance to reclaim the room. The smell of ash, sweat, and damp wool fills the air, familiar but somehow comforting. You sit up and watch the father glance at the sleeping corner. The eldest child lies still, shivering faintly despite the blanket. His skin looks pale under the dull light. The mother notices too. Her hand moves instinctively to the boy's forehead, her expression tightening. You can almost feel the hush that follows. Even without words, everyone understands what might be coming. Illness in winter was as common as snow, and often just as unstoppable. A simple cough could deepen into something deadly. In a world without doctors or medicine as you know it, every sickness was a negotiation between endurance and luck. The family has seen it before. The mother's eyes close briefly as if in prayer. Then she rises to fetch a small pouch from the shelf above the hearth. Inside are herbs, dried and crumbled. A few leaves of sage, a sprig of thyme, and something that smells sharp and resinous. She crushes them in a wooden bowl, mixes them with warm water, and dips a cloth into the liquid. The steam rises gently, carrying the scent through the room. The boy stirs, his breathing rough but steady. She presses the cloth against his chest, her lips moving silently. One set of monastic notes from a 12th century infirmary mentions how peasants used such herbs for both healing and blessing. Sage to draw out sickness, rosemary for remembrance, thyme for courage. The monks often dismissed these remedies as superstition, yet many of their own medicines used the same plants. Faith and knowledge were not enemies here. They were simply two languages for the same fear. You watch the father sit by the fire, adding a piece of wood and stirring the coals until they glow. He glances at his son, then at the tiny flame. You can see the arithmetic of survival in his gaze. Food, fuel, strength, everything must last through the weeks ahead. Winter is not a single season but a series of tests. A curious entry in a parish register from the 14th century describes villagers lighting candles at midnight when illness struck, believing that the flame's endurance mirrored the patient's fate. If the candle burned straight and true, recovery was near. If it sputtered, death lingered close. The superstition may sound grim, yet it reveals something tender too, the human need to see hope flicker in the dark. The mother hums a low song now, something without words. Her voice is husky from smoke, but its melody softens the room. The other children sit quietly, their small eyes following her hands. The father nods slowly, perhaps in prayer, or perhaps simply in surrender to the rhythm of the sound. You notice that even the cow seems calmer, her chewing slower, her breath quieter. Modern researchers studying medieval health often debate whether the peasants' resilience came from strength or resignation. Some argue they built immunity through constant exposure. Others believe they simply learned to accept suffering as ordinary. It is difficult to know where courage ends and endurance begins. The fire crackles softly, sending shadows trembling across the walls. The boy coughs once, then settles again. His mother lifts the wet cloth from his chest, squeezes it out, and lays it down once more. The faint smell of herbs mingles with the smoke, creating a fragrance that feels almost holy in its simplicity. For a moment, you sense the illusion of peace, fragile but real. You glance toward the grandmother. Her eyes are open now, small and bright in the half-light. She watches without moving, her hands folded in her lap. Her silence is steadying, a reminder that this cycle has turned before. She has likely seen children recover and others fade, but she does not interfere. She simply sits as witness, breathing in rhythm with the room. It is said in fragments of oral history that villagers believed sickness crept in through cracks, riding the cold air. To fight it, they stuffed cloth into every gap, hung sprigs of juniper near the door, and whispered prayers to Street Roch or Street Sebastian. These acts, though humble, made the invisible enemy feel containable. You can sense that same quiet defiance here. The mother's hands do not tremble as she works. The boy's breathing eases. The sound of his cough grows softer. The mother exhales, long and slow, and her shoulders drop in relief. No miracle, just a reprieve. The father offers her the last crust of bread, which she accepts but does not eat, setting it aside for later. Hunger, like illness, can wait its turn. You look around the hut, this small world where every sound matters. The fire whispers, the straw crackles, the children murmur in sleep. The scent of herbs lingers in the air, faintly sweet now that the heat has mellowed it. The moment feels timeless, fragile as frost on a window. Outside, the light brightens slightly. The frost on the door melts into droplets that glisten before they vanish. The mother leans back and closes her eyes, her hand still resting lightly on her child's chest. The father stares into the fire, lost in thought. The grandmother begins to hum quietly, a different tune this time, one that sounds like a prayer disguised as a lullaby. You sit there, feeling the rhythm of their breaths, and realize how much meaning lives in such small gestures. Healing is not only herbs and prayers, it is persistence, attention, love measured in silence. These are the medicines that never run out. As the fire grows stronger, the air warms again. The cold has retreated, though only for a while. The family will face it again tomorrow and the next night after that. But for now, they have warmth. They have one another, and the child sleeps. You let your eyes close, listening to the faint crackle of the flames and the sigh of the wind outside. The danger has passed for this night, though winter still waits beyond the door. Yet here, within these wooden walls, life continues, quietly and bravely, as it always has. The air inside the hut has softened again. The sick child breathes steadily now, a faint snore breaking through the hush. The family has returned to their fragile rhythm, that shared pattern of waking, tending, and sleeping. You shift slightly on the straw, feeling the warmth of bodies close by. It is impossible to ignore the nearness of others. In this world, intimacy is not a choice, but a condition of survival. As the night stretches on, you find yourself thinking about what it means to share sleep, not just space. The father and mother lie side by side, the children nestled against them, the grandmother nearby, her face turned toward the wall. Every breath mingles. Every movement ripples through the group. Here, love and fatigue intertwine until they are indistinguishable. It is recorded in several medieval household guides that a husband and wife often slept surrounded by their children or servants. The notion of privacy simply did not exist as it does now. A family's bed was a public arena of life. Rest, talk, nursing, even childbirth all unfolded in the same corner of the same room. To modern eyes, it might seem suffocating, yet for them, it was comfort. You watch the mother roll onto her side, her hand finding the father's without a word. Their touch is small, but it lingers. Even in exhaustion, there is tenderness. They do not speak. Their breathing aligns. Love here is quiet, expressed through the steady act of endurance. One rare letter written by a parish priest in the early 15th century complains that the peasants lie all together in one heap like beasts, knowing not shame. The tone is judgmental, but it reveals something deeper, the discomfort of outsiders confronting a kind of intimacy that defied hierarchy. The peasants did not separate themselves by rank or age when the cold arrived. Everyone shared the same warmth. It is a little-known observation from later travelogues that even guests could find themselves part of the shared bed. If a traveler arrived after sunset, it was expected that the host would offer space near the fire, no matter how small the hut. Hospitality meant more than food. It meant body heat. The gesture was not indecent but honorable, proof that community outweighed discomfort. You close your eyes and try to imagine how this closeness shaped the inner lives of these people. They must have known every sound, every breath, every rhythm of one another's hearts. There was no illusion of solitude. Perhaps this is why their prayers were collective, their grief shared, their joys magnified by proximity. Researchers who study medieval domestic habits have long debated whether this physical closeness fostered harmony or tension. Some describe it as a source of unity, the family acting as a single organism against the elements. Others suspect that tempers often flared in the dark, that whispers carried more than comfort. Yet even in conflict, they could not escape each other. Sleep was both sanctuary and surrender. You turn slightly, the straw rustling under you, and your shoulder brushes the warmth of another person. The touch is light but grounding. You realize that the physical boundaries you take for granted, walls, doors, distance, did not exist here. Emotional survival depended on touch as much as on food. The grandmother coughs softly, and the sound echoes briefly through the stillness. The father reaches out and touches her arm in acknowledgement. Nothing is said, but everything is understood. It is this kind of language that defines the peasant night. Gestures instead of words, presence instead of explanation. In many regions, the act of sharing a bed between husband and wife held both domestic and social significance. Marriage was not only a union of hearts but a contract of labor. Two people together could generate more warmth, more children, more hands for work. Love, in this context, was both spiritual and practical. It began at dawn with shared chores and ended in the shared warmth of the same straw pile. You can almost sense the pulse of that partnership here. The father's breathing deepens as he drifts into sleep. The mother's hand rests gently against his back, her fingers tracing an absent-minded rhythm that could be a blessing or simply habit. Their connection is not grand, not theatrical, but resilient. There is a fragile beauty in the way the family lies arranged around the fire. The smallest child curls between his parents, his tiny hand resting on his mother's wrist. The grandmother sleeps close enough to touch the father's feet if she needed to. The pig, oblivious to all this human choreography, stretches its legs and snuffles contentedly in its own patch of straw. You think of how historians often focus on castles and battles, yet the true heart of the Middle Ages beats in these quiet, smoky rooms. This is where life continued, where humanity persisted in the smallest gestures. Each shared breath, each accidental touch, each murmur of half-sleep carried more truth than 100 chronicles of kings. The fire shifts and sends a soft glow across the sleeping faces. You see lines smoothed away by rest, expressions that belong to no century. The room feels outside of time now, the kind of silence that makes you forget the years between then and now. In the corner, the grandmother stirs and mutters something you cannot understand. Her words dissolve into the air, swallowed by the warmth. The others do not wake. The night holds them gently. The fire flickers lower, and you find yourself sinking back into stillness. The air smells faintly of wool, smoke, and something sweeter, perhaps the herbs the mother used earlier. It is the scent of care, of effort, of love, that exists not in declarations but in endurance. You realize that the real story of the medieval bed is not discomfort or poverty. It is togetherness, imperfect but absolute. You close your eyes once more, the straw soft beneath your head, the warmth steady against your back. Outside, frost grips the world again. But here, in this crowded little hut, humanity holds. The night deepens, and you drift into the same rhythm of sleep, your breath joining the quiet chorus of the living. When you open your eyes again, the room is still dim. The fire has burned itself low, but the scent of warm grain lingers in the air. The mother is already awake, crouched by the hearth, stirring something in the pot. The sound of her spoon against the iron is soft, rhythmic, like a lullaby played in reverse. The others begin to stir one by one, drawn out of dreams by the promise of food. Breakfast, if you can call it that, is more ritual than feast. The mother ladles out a thick pottage made of barley, bits of cabbage, and perhaps a shred of salt pork saved from yesterday. The smell fills the room, hearty and smoky. It is a meal designed not for pleasure but for strength, meant to last through hours of cold and labor. According to surviving manorial records, most peasants subsisted on this kind of food throughout the winter. Bread, when available, was coarse and dark, made from rye or oats. Meat appeared rarely, reserved for feast days or good fortune. For the rest of the year, pottage was the heartbeat of survival, a bowl of warmth, heavy enough to weigh against hunger, light enough to stretch one more day. The father joins her, tearing a small crust of bread in half before dipping it into the pot. He hands the larger piece to the grandmother, a silent act of respect that has no need for words. The children sit cross-legged, clutching their bowls carefully as steam curls upward. There are no plates, no spoons for everyone. The youngest eats with his fingers, licking them clean. It is messy, humble, and real. A curious detail from a 12th century account tells of how families often ate their evening meal before bed to encourage warmth through the night. Food was energy, and warmth was survival. The last meal of the day acted almost as a blanket from the inside. You can see the wisdom in that now. The warmth of the stew spreads through your chest as you imagine it, grounding you in the present. The mother sprinkles something from a small cloth pouch into the pot. It smells faintly sharp, like onions or leeks. She explains softly that it keeps away illness, though perhaps she means it simply adds flavor. The knowledge of what herbs heal and which ones harm passes here from mother to daughter, as precious as land or tools. Archaeologists have found remnants of such herbs charred at the bottom of clay pots, proof that even the poorest homes carried traces of care. To eat was not just to feed the body but to sustain memory. Recipes, though unwritten, lived in gestures and habits. You imagine how each movement of her hand echoes centuries of women before her, stirring the same mixture in the same dim light. The father leans back after finishing his portion, his face softening with satisfaction. He sighs quietly, the sound almost reverent. You can sense that in this hut, a full stomach is a form of grace. The children chatter softly, comparing who got more grain in their bowl. Their laughter is a fragile kind of music that cuts through the cold. Scholars studying peasant nutrition often debate whether these meals provided enough to truly sustain life through hard winters. Some argue that the steady diet of grains and vegetables offered more balance than one might assume. Others claim it was barely sufficient, leaving bodies thin and fragile. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. Not abundance, but enough. You glance around the small room. The fire glows brighter now, the pot nearly empty. The mother wipes the ladle clean with a scrap of linen, then sets it aside. The family lingers for a while, not rushing toward the day. Outside, pale light seeps through the cracks, and you can hear the faint sound of footsteps in the snow as other villagers begin to move about. The grandmother leans forward, muttering a short blessing over the empty bowls. It is not a grand prayer, just a few words of thanks for warmth and food. Gratitude seems to live here in every small act, unspoken but constant. The father nods, the mother smiles faintly, and the children imitate the gesture without understanding its depth. In one collection of rural sayings, there is a line that reads, "A meal shared before sleep is a fortress against the cold." The phrase feels poetic but also entirely practical. To eat together is to build more than warmth. It is to rebuild connection at the end of each day. Every bowl of stew, every crust of bread, every quiet moment of satisfaction binds the family together again after the long hours of labor and survival. You can feel that sense of restoration now, subtle but real. The air hums with comfort rather than fear. The mother stands, stretching her arms. The father pokes the fire gently, coaxing another brief flare of light. The children yawn, eyes already heavy once more. In this world, night and day blur into one long cycle of work and rest, hunger and relief. As they settle back toward their beds, the room dims again. The smell of grain lingers, earthy and familiar. The last few sparks in the hearth dance lazily, painting brief golden arcs across the walls. You can almost hear the silence deepen around you, the warmth sinking back into bodies that know it will not last forever but cherish it anyway. This is not a feast of luxury or plenty. It is a feast of endurance. Each spoonful carries the taste of persistence, each shared glance the quiet understanding that they will do it all again tomorrow. And as you lie back on the straw, the warmth of that simple meal seems to settle in your bones. Outside, Frost is forming again, crawling across the roof like lace. Inside, the family drifts back into sleep, their stomachs full, their bodies calm, their world reduced to the small miracle of survival. Sometime in the deep of night, you wake again. The air has cooled, though not bitterly so, and the fire glows faintly under its shroud of ash. The room feels quiet but not lifeless. The family sleeps soundly, yet you notice a shift in the rhythm of their breathing. It is not the slow, unbroken tide of earlier. Instead, it rises and falls in patterns, as if the night itself breathes with them. You lie still, eyes open, and realize that this is the in-between time, a pause within sleep. Peasants of the Middle Ages often woke naturally in the middle of the night before returning to rest. Historians call it segmented sleep, but to those who lived it, it was simply the order of things. The darkness was too long to pass in one stretch. The body obeyed its own quiet rhythm. You can almost feel that rhythm now. The father sits up, rubbing his hands together, his movements slow and deliberate. The mother stirs beside him and murmurs something low, too soft to catch. He whispers back, and for a moment they share quiet laughter, a sound that seems to belong more to dream than to waking. From written accounts in monastic records, we know that people used this time between sleeps for many small acts. They prayed, whispered to each other, tended to the fire, or simply reflected in silence. Some even rose to step outside and look at the stars, the night too vast to ignore. You imagine the father doing the same now, pushing aside the wooden latch and peering into the frozen stillness beyond the door. He does not step outside. Instead, he sits near the hearth and adds a few splinters of wood to the coals. The flames catch again, soft and steady. He watches them rise, his face a faint map of red and shadow. The mother joins him, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. She pours a little of yesterday's ale into a small cup, takes a sip, then passes it to him. It is not celebration, just a way to fill the space between night and dawn. A curious note from a 1572 court deposition mentions villagers describing this period as the watch. It was a moment when the world felt closer, when one might sense unseen presences or find answers in the quiet. The mind, half dreaming, wandered freely. Some whispered prayers to saints. Others simply listened to the hush of the night, waiting for sleep to find them again. The father reaches for the mother's hand. Their fingers intertwine briefly, not in passion but in quiet recognition. In this small gesture lives the truth of countless marriages bound more by endurance than words. You can see that they find comfort not in talking but in the simple fact of being awake together while the rest of the world dreams. Outside, the wind sighs softly, brushing against the thatch. You can hear faint movements from neighboring huts, the occasional creak of a door or the bark of a dog. It seems that others, too, are awake in their watchful hour. Across the village, hundreds of small fires pulse in rhythm, each a heart beating against the dark. Some scholars of sleep have suggested that this segmented pattern made nights more contemplative, that people used the interval between sleeps to think about their lives or whisper their fears into the quiet. Without candles to burn all night, their reflections were born from the firelight itself. You feel the pull of that same peace now, the comfort of half-waking thoughts that ask nothing but to exist. The grandmother stirs and opens her eyes. She sees the faint light from the hearth and smiles. Her lips move in a slow whisper, perhaps a prayer or a fragment of song. Her eyes drift closed again, her breathing steady. The children remain still, their faces soft with sleep. The hut feels suspended between worlds, one foot in waking, the other still wandering through dreams. You close your eyes and let your mind drift in the same way. Thoughts arrive like visitors at the edge of consciousness. You think of the day that came before, of hunger, laughter, and the smell of grain. You think of the cold that waits outside, patient and eternal. And you think of the strange serenity that fills this space, the understanding that survival itself is holy. It is said in a few fragments of medieval writing that this middle watch was a time when people felt closest to God. The silence of the village, the soft glow of the fire, the steady breath of sleeping kin, all combined to make the world seem fragile and sacred at once. Perhaps that is why they prayed, or sang, or simply sat in wonder. The father lies back down, pulling the blanket over himself and the mother. She nestles against him, her head resting on his shoulder. The warmth returns, slow and steady. The glow of the fire shrinks again, content to fade. You feel the air grow heavier, softer, as the rhythm of sleep takes hold once more. Before you close your eyes, you glance at the window slit where the faintest light presses through. It is not dawn yet, only a promise. The stars outside glimmer faintly, cold but persistent. You think of all the people across centuries who have woken in this same hour, staring into the same darkness, listening to the same wind. There is something deeply human in that continuity, a comfort that outlasts any era. The mother's breathing deepens again. The father's arm lies loosely around her. The children shift slightly, murmuring in their dreams. The hut exhales, its warmth wrapping around you like a gentle tide. You let your eyes close, surrendering to the rhythm of their shared rest. The second sleep begins, calm and unbroken. Outside, the frost glows faintly under the moon. Inside, time folds quietly in on itself, and everything is still. When morning finally arrives, it does not burst into the hut but seeps in slowly, thin and pale through cracks in the thatch. You feel the air shift as the cold presses back against the warmth, testing the strength of the walls. Somewhere outside, a rooster calls into the grey light, his voice cracked but defiant. Inside, you hear the rustle of straw and the low rumble of something large moving. It is not the father or the children. It is the beast in the corner, the family's other heartbeat. The cow rises first, hooves scraping softly against the packed earth. She shakes her head, her ears twitching at invisible flies, and exhales a plume of breath that glows white in the half-light. The smell of her fills the room, sweet and heavy, a mixture of hay, warmth, and damp fur. You watch as the father sits up, rubbing his eyes. He looks at her and smiles faintly, then reaches for the small wooden bucket beside the door. It might seem strange to modern eyes, this closeness between humans and animals, yet it was common in the medieval countryside. Cattle, goats, pigs, even chickens often shared the same room with their owners through the coldest months. According to accounts from manorial surveys, it was both practical and essential. The animal's body heat added a few degrees of warmth to the air. In return, they were protected from thieves and predators that prowled the frozen fields at night. The cow lets out a soft groan as the father begins to milk her. The sound is slow and rhythmic, a steady heartbeat that joins the crackle of the rekindled fire. The children stir at the familiar noise. The mother opens her eyes and smiles without moving, knowing that the day has begun in earnest. There is a curious reference in an old agricultural manual that describes this morning routine as a hymn of gratitude. The writer meant it literally. The act of milking at dawn, the whisper of liquid hitting the pail, was considered a small song of life returning after the night. In these huts, music was not made by instruments but by repetition and care. You watch the father pour the warm milk into a clay pot near the fire. The smell rises instantly, rich and soothing. The mother stirs it with a bit of porridge, making a thin, milky stew that will serve as breakfast. The children gather around eagerly, their faces brightened by the simple sight of something hot to eat. The grandmother sits up, her hands clasped, murmuring something that sounds like thanks. It is strange how easily you begin to accept the presence of the animals here. The cow, patient and calm, seems to radiate peace. The pig at the far end snuffles and grunts softly, rearranging its straw bed before settling again. Even the hens, tucked in a small crate by the door, cluck quietly, as if acknowledging the start of another day. Life moves together, one slow rhythm binding all of them. A traveller's diary from the early 15th century describes how the smell of animals in peasant huts shocked outsiders. He called it a living stew of breath and dung. Yet for those who lived it, that scent meant safety and warmth. It was the smell of survival. To them, the beasts were companions through the long siege of winter. You can imagine the nights when the family whispered stories beside the animals, their words mingling with the sounds of chewing and breathing. In some folk traditions, people believed their beasts could understand them. Cows, in particular, were thought to possess quiet wisdom, their calm eyes holding secrets of the natural world. The grandmother glances at the cow now, as though greeting an old friend. Her lips move with a simple phrase, "Thank you for the warmth." Researchers studying medieval domestic spaces have noted how blurred the line between human and animal life truly was. There was no clear division, no notion of indoors and outdoors as separate realms. The hut was a shared shelter, a world where survival erased boundaries. The presence of animals brought comfort, but also a reminder of vulnerability. They depended on each other, and both would perish if the balance failed. The father finishes his work and wipes his hands on his tunic. The cow lowers her head again, returning to her half-sleep. The children eat quickly, their laughter filling the air. The mother hums softly as she collects the empty bowls, her voice blending with the crackle of the fire and the steady breathing of the animals. It feels as though the entire hut has awakened as one being, a single heartbeat pulsing through wood, straw, and flesh. There is an old superstition from Scandinavian villages that says, if you thank your animals aloud, they will remember your kindness and guard your dreams. You can almost believe it now. The air feels gentler, the sounds softer. The cow shifts her weight, her tail flicking once, then stills again. The father sits by the door, lacing his boots with slow care. He glances back at the family and the animals before stepping outside. A rush of cold air enters briefly, sharp and bright. He pulls his cloak tighter and disappears into the morning frost. The door closes, and the small room exhales. The grandmother leans toward the fire, her hands spread over the faint heat. The mother wipes the milk pot clean, setting it aside for later. The pig rolls in its straw, content. For a moment, you simply listen. Every sound seems to belong. The quiet breath of beasts, the whisper of fabric, the tiny pop of wood in the fire. The harmony is accidental but perfect. You realize now that the family's bond with their animals is not sentiment but survival dressed in gentleness. Warmth, milk, food, and life flow in a circle that needs no words. The medieval hut is not only a house, it is an ecosystem of endurance. You lie back once more, the smell of hay and smoke wrapping around you. The cow shifts again, and the sound feels like a lullaby. The warmth she gives off reaches even your toes. Outside, snow falls softly, blanketing the fields in white silence. Inside, the hut glows with its own quiet light, a living heartbeat against the cold. The day outside disappears into dusk before you notice it. The faint light through the thatch fades into silver, and a wind begins to rise from the fields. Inside, the family has gathered close again, not yet ready for sleep but unwilling to face the chill. The father mends a leather strap by the hearth, his hands steady despite the dimness. The mother hums as she spins wool into thread, her rhythm matching the slow hiss of the fire. The grandmother whispers a prayer that drifts and dissolves into the air. It is in these quiet hours, when the world has retreated into its own silence, that the knock sometimes comes. A faint, uncertain sound on the wooden door, barely louder than the wind. The dog raises its head first, tail twitching but not barking. The father looks toward the door, his expression careful. Another knock follows, slower this time. The mother sets down her spindle and waits. In winter, such a sound could mean anything. A neighbor in need, a traveler lost, or something less explainable. Fear is instinctive, but hospitality is duty. He rises, takes a breath, and unlatches the door. Cold air rushes in, sharp and full of snow. In its wake stands a figure wrapped in a rough cloak, face hidden beneath a hood. Visitors after dark are rare in these frozen months. According to village customs recorded in court rolls, no one travels by choice once the sun sets in winter. To arrive at another's door at night is to confess desperation. The father gestures for the stranger to enter. The figure hesitates, then steps inside, stamping the snow from his boots. His breath billows white in the dim air. The firelight catches his face, rough with frost and fatigue. He is young, perhaps no older than the father, his hands trembling as he holds them out to the fire. The mother silently pours a little broth into a wooden bowl and sets it before him. He eats slowly, murmuring thanks between spoonfuls. The children watch from the corner, wide-eyed, but quiet. One curious mention from a medieval traveller's tale describes how villagers believed that strangers appearing at night might be testing their generosity. Some said such wanderers were angels in disguise. Others feared they could be bringers of misfortune. Either way, to refuse shelter was unthinkable. In a world this cold, cruelty was a sin that could return tenfold. The father sits again, his expression calm but guarded. The stranger speaks softly, explaining that his cart broke on the frozen road, and he has been walking since midday. His accent carries the faint difference of a nearby region, enough to mark him as both familiar and foreign. The mother nods, adding another log to the fire. She gestures toward the straw bed by the door. He bows his head and sits, pulling off his damp boots with slow relief. Scholars who study rural life often note how porous the idea of privacy was in medieval communities. Houses like this were not fortresses, but open spaces of necessity. Doors stayed unlocked because everyone understood that survival sometimes depended on the kindness of others. In these wooden huts, the boundary between inside and outside was little more than trust and hope. The stranger finishes his meal, his voice softening as the warmth reaches him. He thanks the family again and folds his hands. For a moment, no one speaks. The only sounds are the cow shifting in her corner and the fire popping as resin bursts in the wood. The quiet between them is not tense, but full of shared understanding. They all know the feeling of walking too far in the cold. The grandmother breaks the silence first. Her voice, cracked but steady, asks if he carries news from the next village. He nods and tells them of a wedding that took place there before the snow began, and of a shepherd who lost his flock near the river, but found them days later, alive under a drift of snow. The stories are simple, small flickers of life in a frozen season, yet they make the room feel brighter. There are old records of travelers being invited to share not only food but the fire and even the communal bed if the night was too cold. It was not intimacy in the modern sense, but an act of shared survival. To refuse such generosity could mean death. To accept it meant belonging, however briefly, to a household not your own. The mother spreads an extra layer of straw near the door, and the stranger lies down gratefully, pulling his cloak tight. The father adds another log to the fire, then closes the latch. The wind outside beats against the walls, but inside, warmth gathers like breath. The stranger murmurs one last word of thanks before his voice fades into sleep. You look around the small space and sense how fragile this balance is. The family has so little, yet they make room for one more without hesitation. Kindness here is not moral choice but instinct, born from the certainty that next time they might be the ones knocking. Outside, the storm thickens. Snow presses against the door and roof, muting the sounds of the world. Inside, the family drifts slowly toward rest again. The mother tucks the children under the blanket, the grandmother hums softly, and the fire burns steady. The hut feels smaller now, but also warmer, as if generosity itself gives off heat. A faint whisper of wind slides through the thatch, brushing the rafters. You close your eyes and let it blend with the steady breathing around you. It is a reminder that no one survives winter alone. In this place, even strangers become part of the same fragile miracle. By morning, the storm has calmed, leaving the world wrapped in silence. The hut feels still, as if holding its breath. When the father opens the door, a rush of white light floods in, dazzling against the soot-dark walls. Outside, the snow lies thick and unbroken, smooth as linen. The stranger's cart, half buried near the path, glitters under a thin crust of ice. He steps out quietly, brushing frost from his cloak, and bows to the family before beginning the long work of freeing it. Inside, the air feels heavier after his departure. The mother tends the fire, coaxing it back from its weak glow. She moves with practiced ease, stacking small sticks, blowing gently until a thin flame curls upward. The children watch her, mesmerized. Each spark is a small victory. The grandmother sits nearby, rubbing her hands to warm them, muttering that this is the coldest week of the year. The father returns with a bucket of snow and sets it near the fire to melt. Water is precious when the streams freeze. The mother drops a stone into the bucket, one that has been heated beside the fire. Steam rises in soft ribbons, carrying the scent of clean ice. The children crowd closer, drawn to the small miracle of warmth meeting cold. According to fragments of household instructions found in old monastic archives, peasants developed countless ways to cheat the cold. Stones heated in the hearth were tucked into straw beds or wrapped in rags to warm hands and feet. Some even filled small clay jars with embers and placed them under their blankets, though this sometimes ended in disaster when the straw caught fire. Necessity made them inventive, even reckless. The father reaches into a small wooden box and retrieves a lump of peat. He adds it carefully to the flames. The fire changes color, deepening to a richer red. The smell that follows is thick and earthy, filling the hut with a scent of wet soil and smoke. Peat was the winter treasure of the northern villages, cut from marshes in summer and dried under the Sunday. Its slow burn meant the difference between comfort and misery. A curious record from an Irish manor roll describes families who guarded their peat stacks as fiercely as grain stores. To steal from another's pile was treated as a serious crime, for without fuel, even the strongest bodies faltered. You can sense that same reverence here as the father watches the peat catch, his eyes reflecting its steady glow. The grandmother adjusts her shawl and tells the children to fetch a few more stones. They scurry to the edge of the hearth, careful not to burn themselves. She arranges the stones in a small iron pot and waits for them to heat. Later she will wrap them in linen and place them at the foot of the straw bed before nightfall. It is a simple comfort, but one that feels almost luxurious in this bitter season. Historians who study medieval domestic life often point out that warmth was as much a social act as a physical one. Fires burned longer when people gathered around them, body heat combining with flame. You can see it now, the family drawing closer, their faces lit by the same quiet light. The pig stirs in its corner, stretching, then settles again, the faint sound of its breathing blending with the crackle of wood. The mother stirs a small pot, melting the last of the snow for washing. Steam fogs the air, softening the smell of smoke. She hums a slow tune that rises and falls with the rhythm of her hands. Music like this was common in medieval homes, passed down through generations. Songs without words kept time with chores and softened the harshness of repetition. An account from a 15th century visitor to a peasant village mentions how the women sang as they worked in winter. The same melody echoed from hut to hut until the entire valley seemed to hum. The traveler called it the music of survival. You can hear a hint of that now in the mother's quiet voice, a melody older than memory. The children sit close to the fire, wrapping their hands in the warmth of their breath. Their cheeks glow red in the light. The father leans against the wall, eyes closed for a moment of rest. The grandmother carefully lifts one of the heated stones with tongs and wraps it in a scrap of cloth. She presses it into the children's hands. They giggle at the shock of heat, then clutch it gratefully. The sound of their laughter feels like sunlight breaking through clouds. The ingenuity of these small acts is humbling. You realize how much life here depends on balance and rhythm, on gestures that repeat across generations. Each motion is part of a system honed by hardship and love. The family knows exactly how long to let the stone cool before tucking it into the straw, exactly how many sticks to add to the fire to last until morning. It is knowledge earned by endurance. As the day fades, the hut glows softly, a bubble of warmth inside the frozen world. Outside, the stranger's cart creaks free from the snow, and his figure vanishes down the road. The sound of his footsteps fades until only the wind remains. Inside, the family gathers for another quiet evening, their breath rising like smoke, their faces calm and content. You watch the fire burn lower, its last coals shimmering like hidden stars. The heated stones wait beside the bed, the peat smoulders with slow patience, and the cold stays where it belongs, outside. For a brief moment, you understand the strange peace that comes with surviving the impossible. In this hut, warmth is not a given thing, but a triumph renewed each night. You lie back into the straw, the air thick with comfort and smoke. The grandmother hums again, softer now, her song fading into the steady crackle of the fire. The warmth of the stones seeps slowly toward your feet. The wind outside sighs one last time and falls quiet. Inside, the family sleeps, their small world glowing gently against the dark. The night is still again. The air inside the hut feels calm, as if the storm has carried away every remaining trace of noise. You open your eyes to the faint orange shimmer of the fire, now little more than a breath of light. Someone is stirring beside it, moving quietly so as not to wake the rest. It is the father, crouched on one knee, adding a few small sticks to the coals. The glow brightens slightly, and you see his face softened by fatigue and peace. Through the cracks in the wooden walls, a faint sound begins to drift. It is not the wind this time, but something steadier and slower, the tolling of a distant bell. The sound rolls across the frozen fields, rich and low, carrying farther than seems possible. The father pauses, his hand hovering over the fire, and listens. A small smile flickers at the corners of his mouth. In many medieval villages, the rhythm of life was measured not by clocks but by the sound of church bells. They marked each passing hour, called workers to fields, and summoned the faithful to prayer. Even when unseen, the church stood at the center of the landscape, its voice traveling through mist and frost, reminding everyone of time's quiet authority. The bell rings again. The mother stirs in her sleep but does not wake. The grandmother opens her eyes and whispers a few words, perhaps an old prayer or simply an acknowledgement of another day's arrival. The children turn over in their straw, their movements gentle, still caught in the tide of dreams. It is a curious fact noted in monastic diaries that the bells of the night hours, matins and lauds were sometimes heard even in the farthest cottages, and villagers often shaped their sleep around them. To wake briefly at the first sound, to murmur a prayer, and then to return to rest was a pattern shared across much of the medieval world. The sound carried both comfort and reminder that even in isolation, they were part of something larger. The father sits back, rubbing his palms together for warmth. His eyes close for a moment as he listens to the faint echoes fade into the snow. The mother wakes now and joins him by the fire. Together they sit in silence, watching the glow of the coals and the soft curve of smoke rising toward the roof. The cow shifts in her corner, a quiet sigh filling the space where words might be. A small parchment from a Benedictine chronicle mentions that the faithful believed bells could protect a village from evil spirits during long winters. The vibration of their sound was thought to break the hold of darkness, keeping unseen things at bay. Whether or not that was ever true, you can feel the comfort of it here. The bells draw invisible lines across the night, connecting hut to church, family to faith, heart to heartbeat. The mother reaches for her spindle and begins to spin wool by the fading firelight. The sound is faint, a gentle whirring that fills the silence. She hums as she works, her voice soft but steady, carrying the melody of the bell's echo. The father leans against the wall, eyes half closed, listening. The world outside remains frozen, yet inside, warmth spreads again, quiet and sure. In some accounts from rural priests, it is said that villagers would time their prayers to the sound of these bells even when too far away to hear them. Habit became faith, and faith became rhythm. You sense that in the hut now, where every movement, the feeding of the fire, the soft hum of song, the slow breathing of sleep feels like its own kind of devotion. The grandmother sits up slowly, her shawl slipping from her shoulders. Her hands tremble as she traces the sign of the cross in the air, her lips moving in a silent blessing over her family. She does this every morning, not as ritual but as instinct. For her, survival itself is prayer enough. You can almost feel the connection stretching outward from this small wooden room into the larger world. Somewhere beyond the snow, another family hears the same bell and murmurs the same words. Across valleys and frozen rivers, the sound unites them all in invisible fellowship. The idea is simple but profound. Each small hut becomes part of one immense breath, a collective endurance carried by faith and habit. The mother finishes spinning and sets the spindle aside. She leans her head briefly on the father's shoulder. The gesture is wordless but full of peace. The fire flickers, the smoke drifts upward, and for a moment, everything feels perfectly still. You can almost hear the quiet hum of the earth turning beneath the snow. Historians of medieval spirituality often describe this time of night as a border between the sacred and the ordinary. The world holds its breath, balanced between labor and rest, sound and silence, faith and survival. You sense that here. The bells have faded now, but their echo remains, hanging like light in the air. The father rises at last and adjusts the blanket over the sleeping children. The mother stirs the fire one last time, covering it gently with ash to keep it smouldering until dawn. Then they lie down again, hands still faintly warm from tending the flame. Outside, the snow glows faintly under a thin moon. The distant church is invisible, yet its presence lingers in the rhythm of the night. Inside, the family sleeps again, wrapped in both warmth and memory. The bell will sound once more before sunrise, and when it does, the world will answer, as it always has, with breath and gratitude. You sleep for a while, but the night has not finished its stories. A sound draws you awake, faint but distinct, like wood shifting under pressure. The air feels different now. The fire has died to a whisper of orange, and the cold presses closer to the floor. Even in this warmth, you sense a change, something older than the weather. The grandmother stirs first. Her eyes open, bright in the dim light, and she whispers a word that might be prayer or warning. In medieval winters, darkness carried its own language. People believed the night was alive, not just with wind or wolves, but with unseen beings that slipped between cracks and shadows. They gave them names that changed from one valley to another. Some were protectors, others were blamed for every knock and draught. A man might swear he heard the devil in the chimney. A woman might say she saw a soul wandering outside her door. These beliefs were not madness. They were meaning built from fear. According to notes from a 15th century parish record, villagers often hung iron keys or small crosses above the hearth to guard the household through the night. The fire was sacred, a boundary no spirit could cross. You look at the family now and notice a small bundle of twigs tied with string hanging from the beam above the fire. It sways slightly in the draught. Perhaps rosemary, perhaps rowan. Either way, it serves the same purpose: protection through symbolism. The wind scratches against the roof, and a handful of snow sifts down from the thatch. The cow shifts her weight uneasily, snorting once before settling again. The grandmother murmurs to her softly, calling her by name. Her voice calms both animal and air. The mother opens her eyes, following the exchange with quiet familiarity. A curious note from a collection of French folk songs mentions that some families sang short chants when the wind rose at night, believing the melody could confuse wandering spirits. The songs were never long, just patterns of sound, passed down like recipes. The grandmother hums one now, a low tune that wavers like smoke, steady and fragile. The others listen, even in sleep. The fire flickers as if responding to her. A tiny spark jumps, then fades. The shadows shift across the walls, taking strange shapes. Your imagination joins theirs, and for a heartbeat, you could almost believe those shapes move with purpose. The line between faith and fear feels very thin. Modern historians argue over how seriously peasants believed these stories. Some think they were simply ways to explain natural sounds in the dark. Others suggest they were expressions of a world where the spiritual and material were never truly separate. You decide, it hardly matters. When the night is long enough, and the cold is deep enough, every sound needs an explanation that feels human. The grandmother's song fades. She lies back slowly, her face calm again. The mother reaches for the cross carved into the wall near her bed and touches it lightly before closing her eyes. The gesture is small but certain. The father shifts, his hand resting near the fire poker, half out of habit, half out of superstition. Each movement feels part of a quiet ritual, learned through centuries of repetition. In some corners of Europe, people placed bowls of water near the door during winter nights so wandering spirits could see their reflection and lose their power. Others left a bit of bread for the dead, believing it brought peace for the living. You imagine such customs repeated here long ago, perhaps forgotten now but still echoing in instinct. The family's stillness feels older than religion itself, a survival of something primal. Outside, the wind rises again. It moans across the snow, brushing the walls of the hut. The sound is both mournful and soothing. The pig grunts softly, the cow's tail flicks, and the grandmother opens one eye, whispering again. This time the sound she makes is not a word but a sigh, an offering to the quiet. A flicker of light catches on the beam above the hearth. The small bundle of herbs twists gently in the draught. The fire stirs as if in answer, its last embers glowing brighter for a heartbeat before fading again. It feels as though the hut itself breathes, aware of the old song and the watchers within. You can almost taste the mixture of smoke and cold on your tongue, the flavor of fear turned into reverence. It is strange how safety in this world depends not only on walls and warmth but on belief. Each superstition, each charm, each whispered blessing builds another layer of defense against the unseen. You lie back slowly, feeling the straw shift beneath you. Your body remembers the chill, but your mind lingers on the story carried by the wind. The grandmother's breathing evens, the mother's hand rests still against the cross, and the father's eyes close again. The hut falls silent once more, but the quiet feels deeper now, as if something has been acknowledged and soothed. Outside, the snow glows faintly under the moon. The wind moves through the trees, gentler now, its voice lower, almost kind. The world feels enormous and close at the same time, and you understand why people once filled that space with spirits and songs. It is not foolishness. It is a way to make peace with the dark. The fire gives one last sigh, a puff of smoke rising before the final ember fades. You close your eyes and let the stillness return. The hut feels safe again, protected by habit, faith, and the quiet endurance of those within. Sleep settles like snow, slow and complete. Morning arrives without ceremony. The first light creeps through the cracks in the wall, soft as dust, and the world seems to inhale. You can hear it before you see it, that slow stirring of life returning after a long, frozen night. The wind is still outside, but the cold feels gentler now, as if something has shifted. The fire is only a pile of grey ash, but its faint warmth clings to the air, like a memory that refuses to leave. The father is already awake. He sits by the door, tightening the cord around his boots, his breath rising in thin white clouds. The mother kneels beside the hearth, sweeping away the ashes and feeding the first new twigs to the coals. You can smell smoke again, the scent sharp and promising. The children murmur softly, half asleep, their cheeks pink with the ghost of warmth still lingering in the straw. When she opens the door, the mother freezes for a moment. The world outside is blinding. Overnight, the snow has hardened into a perfect crust. glittering under a weak but genuine Sunday. The air smells cleaner now, the sharp scent of frost replaced by something crisp and new. The father steps outside and looks toward the horizon. You follow his gaze and see what he sees, a faint line of water glistening where the stream begins to thaw. It is not much, but it means the cold is beginning to lose its hold. According to local sayings recorded by a wandering priest, this first softening of the world was called the sigh of spring. It marked no real change in temperature, but carried the promise that change would come. The villagers listened for it each year, just as you now listen to the soft drip of melting snow from the thatch above the door. The children spill out after him, their bare feet pressing small shapes into the snow before they squeal and retreat inside. Their laughter is high and bright, startling the stillness. Even the cow lifts her head at the sound, her big brown eyes calm and curious. The mother smiles faintly, shaking her head, but the warmth in her expression is unmistakable. A curious entry in an old manor record describes how peasants celebrated the first thaw with small rituals of gratitude. They might pour milk on the doorstep, or leave a crust of bread in the field for the birds. It was not superstition so much as recognition. After months of endurance, any sign of mercy from the world deserved acknowledgement. The grandmother sits near the fire, hands folded, her shawl drawn tight. She watches the doorway with eyes that have seen this turning of the year too many times to count. Her lips move silently, perhaps in prayer, perhaps in memory. She knows that spring will not come quickly, that frost will return before the ground truly softens. Yet the light is enough to lift her shoulders. For now, hope is tangible. The father returns, carrying a few branches gathered from the edge of the woods. He sets them near the fire to dry, their ends glistening with tiny beads of thawed ice. The smell of wet bark fills the hut, fresh and green. It feels like breathing after holding one's breath for too long. Modern researchers studying seasonal rhythms often note how deeply human moods were tied to natural light in pre-industrial times. The first dawns after long winter darkness could alter entire communities' temperaments. You can feel that shift here too. The children's laughter seems brighter, the mother's movements lighter, the father's silence softer. The mother stirs a pot of grain, now mixed with the last of the milk. The warmth spreads quickly through the air, the smell of breakfast mingling with the scent of melting snow. She sets bowls in front of each child, and their chatter fills the room again. The father eats quietly, glancing at the open door as sunlight spills across the floor. The grandmother takes her portion last, as always, murmuring thanks before lifting her spoon. You sit with them, feeling the gentle hum of contentment that follows the first real light of the season. The world outside may still be frozen, but here inside, something has begun to loosen. The room smells less of smoke and more of earth. The air carries the faint promise of green things hidden beneath the snow. It is a small miracle, this slow awakening. Each year it repeats, each time it feels new. You can almost sense the ancestors of these peasants breathing the same sigh of relief centuries before, just as others will do centuries after. The details change, but the feeling remains. The first light of thaw is not only a season, it is a lesson in endurance. The father steps outside again and turns his face toward the pale Sunday. The light hits him like blessing and memory combined. Behind him, the children chase each other through the doorway, squealing with laughter as they scatter snow into the air. Their footprints will vanish by evening, but for now, they mark the proof of life returned. Inside, the grandmother begins to hum a melody you have heard before, something she sang to calm the wind. It sounds different now, softer, lighter, less about protection and more about gratitude. The mother joins her quietly as she stirs the pot. The sound fills the small space, a gentle echo of the bells you heard days ago. The hut is still worn and smoky, but it no longer feels like a prison of survival. It feels like a heartbeat, returning to its natural rhythm. Outside, the snow melts one drop at a time, tiny diamonds falling from the roof. Inside, the family finishes their meal in peaceful silence. The fire hums again, steady and confident. You close your eyes for a moment, feeling the warmth of the room seep into your skin. When you open them again, the sun is higher and the air seems to glow. The season is changing, slowly but surely. The cold is retreating, step by patient step, and hope, small as it is, sits beside the fire, waiting to grow. By the next morning, the light feels stronger. The air that slips through the cracks no longer bites but brushes. A few drops of melted snow fall from the roof, tapping the earth in small rhythms like a hesitant song. The fire burns steadily again, and its smoke drifts upward in a smooth column, calm and blue. The family moves slowly, the way people do when their bodies begin to trust warmth again. The father steps outside first. His boots sink less deeply into the snow than before. The crust that once resisted every footstep has softened, and the ground gives slightly, as if remembering its purpose. The fields beyond the village glimmer with patches of exposed brown earth. Birds circle high above, calling out tentative notes. After months of silence, their voices sound like laughter. Inside, the mother folds the blankets, shaking the dust from their edges. She spreads them on a line by the fire to air them out. The smell that fills the room is strong and familiar, the scent of wool, smoke, and earth. The grandmother sits nearby, her eyes half closed, murmuring something that sounds like a hymn. Her hands move slowly, smoothing the wrinkles in her shawl. Every gesture is patient, as though she knows the season will not rush. A handful of historical letters written by traveling monks describe this very moment of the year, when the frost weakens and life edges back toward the surface. They called it the long sleep's awakening. The phrase fits perfectly. The people, the land, even the air seem to stretch, yawning after the weight of cold months. The children are already outside. Their laughter rings through the morning, the sound clear and bright. They chase the dog in circles and scoop handfuls of melting snow to toss into the air. The father watches them with a faint smile before bending to scrape frost from the bucket by the door. He dips it into the thawed stream and brings back water that glitters like glass. The first fresh water of spring is a gift worth pausing for. The mother pours it into the pot, mixing it with the last handful of barley. The stew will taste no different than before, but something about it feels renewed. The family sits together, steam rising from the bowls, and for a moment, the silence between them feels full instead of empty. A curious tradition noted in an old chronicle tells that villagers once greeted this first thaw with a feast of whatever remained from winter stores. It was both celebration and surrender, a way of saying to the earth, "We have survived." The peasants in this hut do not feast, but you can sense the same gratitude in every glance, every quiet breath. The father finishes his bowl and wipes his hands. He looks around the hut, studying the soot-streaked walls and patched roof. There is work to be done, and plenty of it, but he does not rush to begin. The mother catches his gaze and nods once. Between them passes a language older than words, the understanding that survival itself is enough for this morning. The grandmother begins to hum again, the same tune she sang during the coldest nights, though now it sounds softer, slower, like a song being laid to rest. The firelight touches her face, and for an instant, she seems both ancient and young. The children sit at her feet, listening without understanding, and then one begins to hum along. The room fills with a melody of life continuing quietly, almost shyly, into another season. Historians often write of empires and kings, but these are the victories that last longer. The sound of a family breathing in rhythm, the fire catching after a night of smoke, the faint green promise beneath the snow. The people who lived in these huts left no grand monuments, yet the trace of their lives remains in every field still ploughed, in every cottage hearth that burns on their memory. The father steps outside again, shading his eyes. The sunlight touches his face fully now, and he stands still, letting it warm him. The air smells of wet wood and thawing earth. In the distance, a church bell rings once, soft and round, a sound without command. It feels less like an order than a greeting. The mother follows him out, her shawl pulled close. The children run ahead to the stream, shouting with delight as their fingers trail in the cold water. The grandmother stays inside, sitting by the fire. She watches them through the doorway and smiles faintly. You can see in her face the deep knowledge that this moment is fleeting but precious. Winter will come again, but so will spring, and so will life. You linger in the doorway, the cold air brushing your skin, and breathe deeply. The smell of thawed soil and smoke mingles with the clean scent of snow. The sounds of the family blend with the faint hum of the wind, forming a harmony so ordinary it feels holy. The mother calls the children back. The father closes the door behind them. The fire glows once more, not with urgency but with steadiness. It no longer needs to battle the dark. It only needs to keep them company. The grandmother hums her final note and rests her hands on her knees. Outside, the light climbs higher, golden now instead of grey. The long sleep of winter is truly ending. Inside, warmth lingers, and the small hut, worn and smoky, feels like a promise kept. You stay a little longer in that quiet, letting your thoughts settle the way snow does after a storm. The hut grows dim again as the fire sinks low, its glow soft as breath. The sounds of the family fade, replaced by the hush of evening returning. Every sound seems slower now, every motion gentler. You can almost feel the warmth seep from your imagination into your bones. Picture yourself lying back on that straw bed, the faint smell of wood smoke still in the air. The walls are rough, but they hold the night at bay. Outside, the wind sighs softly, brushing against the thatch like a lullaby. The cow shifts once more, a small thud of reassurance in the dark. You think of everything this family has endured, and you realize that their peace is not built on comfort but on continuity. Each winter comes and goes, each season repeating its own lessons. Survival, gratitude, hope, they are all part of the same story. Let that thought quiet your breathing. The world outside your own window may be brighter, louder, more certain, but the heart of that small wooden hut remains somewhere inside you. It is the place that remembers the value of warmth, the sound of shared sleep, and the grace of a morning when frost finally loosens its hold. Take one slow breath. Feel the heaviness leave your body. The embers in the hearth are fading now, glowing just enough to guide you into rest. The snow continues to fall outside, not in anger but in peace. The night is patient, the world is kind. And as your eyes close, imagine the quiet breath of that distant hut, still keeping its watch. Sweet dreams.